Well, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Caroline mentioned about a Maswell family. Well, Andrea and I still regard ourselves as being part of the Maswell family. We've been in West Yorkshire now for 11 years, believe it or not. But it's lovely to come back to my spiritual home, certainly, that was for over 50 years. And Andrea's certainly over 30 years. So it's great to be with you once again, obviously, and to see you all. I wonder if you would bear with me today, because you might have noticed, some of you who are observant might have noticed that I normally wear glasses. But we've both had our operations on our eyes. We've had our cataracts removed. And actually, we see much better at a distance. I can see all of you. Lovely now. But of course, we're both still waiting for our reading glasses. So you might find that I might have to resort just occasionally to a magnifying glass just for the finer print. But Andre has typed out my message in very bold. So I hope I'm going to be able to see that all right and deliver that all right. One of the most practical books in the New Testament is the letter of James. James is sometimes quite blunt. And he doesn't mince his words. He tells it as it is. But although his words are a challenge, they can also be a great encouragement, and none more so than the 5 verses that I'm just going to read to you from the letter of James. It's James chapter 4, and I'm going to read just the 5 verses that are here. This is why I'm going to have to resort to my magnifying glass again. But it says this: "Now listen, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is a sin for them." I wonder if you have made plans. I wonder if you're planning perhaps a holiday. Maybe you've a holiday that you've booked soon. I know there is, because Sally's going to Croatia. She's told me all about it. Or perhaps there's a family wedding or a special anniversary of some kind. And or maybe, I don't know your ages, you may be looking forward to retirement. I've been retired for a number of years now, and I fully recommend it. But as long, of course, as you've got plans. Because, of course, nothing wrong in making plans like that. It's right and proper to have plans, to have a purpose and a goal. In fact, I would say this: if you are planning retirement, you must have a purpose and a goal for the rest of your life. To make provision for the future. That's important too, particularly when we get older. But it's true, isn't it, that in this life, and it's certainly true in my experience, and I guess it is in yours, nothing is certain. Nothing is certain. We have no real guarantee that our plans will be fulfilled. Now, because of that, there's a danger of falling into 2 extremes. We can either be over anxious as we look around us and we see all that's happening in the world and what's happening in our lives. We can become over anxious. Or, of course, we can be like ostriches in the sand, with our heads in the sand, and be overconfident about the future. The people whom James was addressing in the 5 verses we read together had made plans, but they fell into the second category. So James reprimands them because of their attitude. Their view of the future was completely wrong. Verse 13, and also in verse 16, says this: "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go to this or that city, and spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. You boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil." In other words, all such self-confidence is wrong. James was speaking primarily to businessmen, maybe some businesswomen as well. They had got big plans. They were going to a certain city and they were going to set up business. They anticipated that they would spend a year there and make a good profit. Now, James, of course, doesn't condemn them for that. There's nothing wrong in setting up in business or indeed making a good return on our investment if our dealings are legitimate and fair. But what James does criticize them for is their overconfidence, their arrogance, their pride. They boasted about the future and bragged about their presumed success. But how did they know they were going to be successful? When they got to the city, they might not have been able to find premises to set up their business. And if they had, people might not have wanted to buy their goods. There were all sorts of reasons which might have hampered their business plans. So here in these verses that we read together, James highlights 3 important things why it's not only extremely foolish, but also very wrong to have the attitude of those businessmen. In short, to be overconfident about the future in this world. The first reason is this. It's in verse 14. Let me read verse 13 to you again as well. "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. You do not even know what will happen tomorrow." Although it's not wrong to make plans, we must always realize that those plans can so easily change because something may crop up tomorrow. Indeed, may crop up this afternoon. We may have plans for this afternoon. But somehow those plans might not come to fruition for some reason or the other. Things that we have not anticipated. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, do we? As the writer of Proverbs puts it in Proverbs chapter 27, "Do not boast about tomorrow," he says, "for you do not know what a day may bring forth." So James says to these businessmen, and look, here you are boasting about spending a year in a certain city. How can you do that when you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow? The second reason James gives for not being overconfident about the future in this word is also in verse 14. And something, I guess, that we've got to accept, although we don't like to think about it sometimes. He says, "What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. You people, you boast about carrying on your business for a year in the city. how do you know? And he puts it bluntly, because James puts things very bluntly. He says, how do you know you're going to live that long? To put it bluntly, James might have said, this time next week you might not be alive. Life is short, so fragile and uncertain. It's like a mist, which is there for 1 minute and then it's gone. Some person has put it like this: the length of our lives is uncertain as the morning fog. Now, we've got a marvellous example, of course, in our Bibles to illustrate what James is saying here. And this is why I'm going to have to resort to my magnifying glass again. We find it in Luke chapter 12. Let me just read just a few verses to you. It's a familiar story. This is it's a parable that Jesus told. And this is what he said. He said this: the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. This man had made plans for his retirement. What a great time he was going to have. He was going to take life easy. I'm afraid sometimes we think about that when we retire. We think, oh yeah, life's going to be lovely. It doesn't always work out that way, I can assure you. But he says, I'm going to take life easy, eat, drink, and merry. He had a good income. His barns were bursting at the seams. Almost certainly he had become extremely wealthy. His health was probably good. The future looked rosy. But what was the real problem was this: that he had probably had given no thought whatsoever to his relationship with God. Or if he had, perhaps perhaps he believed in heaven, but he thought he was good enough, that he didn't need the salvation which God offers in the Lord Jesus Christ. He didn't feel like the Pharisee that we read about in the temple, that he needed forgiveness. He was all right. His life was okay. It was pleasing to God. Sadly, in a few hours, he had died and would have to stand before God and give an account of his life. I had a very, very sad illustration of that in real life. My penultimate job in the Home Office, in the civil service, was to have the posh name of Deputy Controller of Office Services, I think, something like that. It was responsible for the messenger service and the photocopying services and all that kind of stuff. But I was taking over for a man called Eric. Eric was a lovely man. He was a superman. I liked Eric very much. And of course you usually have the fortnight overlap to try and learn as much about the job as you can. And then it came to the party at the end, the farewell party. And Eric stood up and he said, I'm telling you what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to start off by decorating the house. And then I'm going to buy a new car. And then we're going off on a lovely holiday, my wife and I. I can't remember quite where he said he was going, but he was going to have a lovely holiday somewhere. That was on the Friday. On the following Wednesday, his wife rang and said, I'm sorry to say, Eric's died. Such a sad situation. What is our life? A mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. A shadow, grass that soon withers. But there's a third reason why it's foolish and very wrong to be overconfident about the future in this life. James says this: now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on and make money. You ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Or if you like, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or that. With any plans we make, we must always remember that our lives are in God's hands. God directs our future. It's He who determines what's going to happen. The writer of the Proverbs puts it like this: many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. These men and women to whom James was writing had left God out of their lives. They were boasting about their plans of setting up a business in a certain city without any thought that God may have different plans for them. Our lives are in God's hands, and only He knows what the future holds. Key thing for us, I guess, this morning is to recognise that. To recognise that whatever happens to us, our lives are in His hands. We must never forget God or leave Him out of the equation. There's a particular danger, I suppose, when everything's going fine, everything's going well, and somehow then we can so easily forget that God is in control. And that we might do things that is not what God wants. We forget that we are utterly and completely dependent upon Him. That was the problem, of course, with these businessmen to whom James was speaking. They had probably been successful in their business. They were, in the past, they had become so overconfident about the future. God didn't play any part in their plans. They had forgotten that the future was in His hands. How did the writer to the Proverbs put it again? Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. Our Living Bible paraphrases that verse like this, an expression that we sometimes use. Man proposes, but God disposes. Man proposes, but God disposes. It's said that Napoleon Bonaparte was considering invading Russia. A friend tried to dissuade him using those very words. Napoleon, don't you realize that your life is in God's hands? This is not what God may not want. Man proposes, but God disposes. And he tried to emphasize that to Napoleon. But Napoleon's arrogant reply was, I dispose as well as propose. A Christian at the time who heard that set down that as the turning point of Bonaparte's fortunes. God, it will not suffer a creature with impunity, said this man, to usurp God's prerogative. And of course that forecast was absolutely true. That was the beginning, that Russian campaign marked the beginning of Napoleon's downfall. Man proposes, but God disposes. And for us to go through life or to conduct any part of our lives without reference to God smacks of arrogance, and arrogance is something that the Bible everywhere condemns. And James says that exactly here. He said we shouldn't be overconfident about the future, but instead we should say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. We don't hear it much these days, but only us oldies will probably remember this, if you remembered it at all. But after the notices, when a person got up and gave the notices, or if indeed talking about proposed future events in services, or when Christians were referring to things planned for the future, they used to add the two words, DV. DV. DV stands for two Latin words, Deo volente. Deo volente. God willing. God willing. They gave out the notices and said, God, all these things are going to happen, God willing. DV, God willing. For we don't know what the future holds. We don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Our lives are so fragile and uncertain. Now, in the light of what James says here in these verses. Perhaps I could just mention very briefly at the end three things. Very briefly. The first two to challenge us, but the third to comfort and encourage us, because I don't want all this to be gloom and doom this morning. I want us to have some encouragement from it as well. And three things. The first thing is this: if life is so short and uncertain, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, indeed we don't even know if there will be a tomorrow, then we should be sure that we're in our right relationship with the Lord. That's absolutely essential. Trusting what he did on the cross, and not only not on our own goodness, thinking that that's enough. That's the first thing. Second thing, we should be living our lives with some urgency, not leaving until tomorrow the good that we should be doing today. James puts it like this in the last verse. He says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. I came across a poem. It's not exactly a Wordsworth or Keats. In fact, it's a rather strange sort of poem. But let me just read it to you, because I guess it sums up, in a sense, what James is saying here about not leaving things when we ought to be doing them. It says this: he was going to be all that a mortal could be tomorrow. No one would be kinder or braver than he tomorrow. A friend who was troubled and weary, he knew he'd be glad for some help, and he needed it too. On him he would call and see what he could do tomorrow. Each morning he'd stack up the letters he'd write tomorrow, and think of the folk he would fill with delight tomorrow. It was too bad indeed he was busy today and hadn't a moment to stop on his way. More time he would have to say, give others, he'd say, tomorrow. The greatest of mortals this man would have been tomorrow. The world would have known him had he ever seen tomorrow. But the fact is, he died, and yet he faded from view, and all that was left when his living was through was a mountain of things he intended to do tomorrow. And I guess that sums up perhaps what James is saying here. Don't leave what you ought to do. Get on with it, because life is short and you may not be able to do it. Don't leave it tomorrow if it can be done today. The third thing now is something to comfort and encourage us. If God holds the future in his hands, there is no need to be anxious. If we're in a right relationship with him, there's no need to be anxious. Yes, do you get anxious? I do sometimes. You look at the world in which we're living. Are the wars that are there in Ukraine and in the Middle East, are they going to end soon, or are they going to escalate and become wider? Are we going to have a world war at the end of the war? A global conflict? And it can worry us and concern. Or we may look at our own lives and we think, what does the future hold for us? Maybe we're suffering with ill health and so on. What does the future hold for us? Maybe something that bothers us and it makes us anxious. But as Christians, we can look forward to the future with confidence. Confidence not in ourselves or our plans, but confident that God is with us and has mapped out our lives. We dispose, so we propose, but God disposes. He's promised never to leave us, not even for a moment. He's always with us. Whatever our circumstances, we know that God is always going to be there to guide, to strengthen, to bless, to ensure that all things work out for our good, and at the end of it all, to take us safely to heaven. If we have trusted in him, we can look forward to it. Doesn't matter what's going to happen. And God doesn't promise us that we're going to have an easy life in this world. We may have lots of problems ahead of us before that happens. But one thing we do know is that God never leaves us nor forsakes us. He's always there if we put our trust in him. Let me close with a hymn. It's an old hymn. Jeff hadn't even heard of it, and I guess maybe not some of others may not have heard of it as well. But let me read it to you, because it sums up what I've been saying, what James has been saying here this morning. He says this: I do not know what lies ahead, the way I cannot see, yet one stands near to be my guide. He'll show the way to me. I know who holds the future, and he'll guide me with his hand. With God, things don't just happen. Everything by him is planned. So as I face tomorrow with its problems large and small, I'll trust the God of miracles, give to him my all. I do not know how many days of life are mine to spend, but one who knows and cares for me will keep me to the end. I do not know the course ahead, what joys and griefs are there, but one is near who fully knows. I'll trust his loving care. I know who holds the future, and he'll guide me with his hand. With God, things don't just happen. Everything by him is planned. So as I face tomorrow with its problems large and small, I'll trust the God of miracles. Give to him my all.